call the meeting to order at 6:05. And please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we have a modification to the agenda.
Yeah, I do have a few modifications. So, as we know, Board Vice President Tyson Bryant resigned. And so today we have the privilege of doing an oath of office for our new board member, Melissa Kinsler. So welcome. And Tyson also served as vice president. And we do our annual organization in December, but we need to refill that position until December. So I'd like to add that oath of office. And then we have an addendum to the Human Resources calendar.
I'll motion to approve the modification of agenda, adding the oath of office to the opening, election of vice president, and the human resources consent calendar addendum to the consent agenda.
All in favor? Oh, can I get a second?
I second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. And, yep, next is oath of office.
So Melissa, you want to join me right up front here?
Of course.
It's really long. So I'm going to read this whole paragraph, and your first test is to memorize the whole paragraph at one time and say it all.
Oh,
And if you can do that, then you get to be a board director.
I'll just leave now.
I'll try to chunk it up. All right, so I state your name.
I, Melissa Kinsler,
Do hereby solemnly swear
do hereby solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of Director of Ording School District,
of Director of Ording School District,
Pierce County,
Pierce County,
State of Washington.
State of Washington,
There's the easy part. To the best of my ability.
to the best of my abilities.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And then let's do that.
Thank you.
Great. Congratulations and welcome. Thank you. All right, so now we'll move on to the election of vice president and the nominations.
I would like to nominate Carrie Thibodeau as our vice president.
Thank you.
I would like to nominate Carrie Thibodeau as vice president.
Thank you. Is that all?
Yeah.
Any other discussion? Sorry, I'm filling in tonight, so bear with me.
She's learning how to be
I'm
vice
learning.
president before she's actually,
Before I'm in the role.
yeah.
So any discussion? Okay.
I'll do a roll call for that. Director Lloyd,
I nominate Carrie Thibodeau. Yes.
Director Kinsler,
I nominate Carrie Thibodeau.
Director Thibodeau,
I nominate myself.
With a question mark.
Director Perez, I nominate Carrie Thibodeau. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carrie, thank you for serving in that role. And thank you for stepping up as vice president tonight and leading our meetings.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so, oh yeah. How am I? Oh, I'm jumping ahead. Community and staff comments and Kareem McLean, did I say your name correctly?
No, that's okay, nobody does. It's Korean Raekwon.
Raekwon, thank you.
No deal.
Sorry for that.
That's all right, not a problem. Okay, first of all, I want to thank you guys for the work that you guys have done on the maintaining professional staff and student boundaries policy or whatever it is. there's just a few comments I want to share. I feel the words should and discourage provide an option. I would like to see them changed to are required to be visible and are required to not be alone with the student. I feel that the 2 educators at a time for situations stated would impact the education of other students and would not be financially feasible. And educators need to be required to include a parent or a guardian, and I believe, in all electronic communication with them. I think there should be a parent or guardian included in that. My concern with prohibiting educators from having students in their home is that often students and educators, children are friends, and that's really not fair to the educators' children, especially when we live in a small town. Who would they be friends with if their teachers are, everybody would be a student. So that leads me to the other thing. My daughter, somebody I dearly love, is very involved in student leadership. And I had had some really uneasy feelings regarding one of her leaders who she has been around. And recently, when the post came out about Megan, that put to light some of my concerns. That is why I apologize for the stir that it's caused, but I'm the one who took it from Megan's personal page and posted it on social media. I didn't do that to create a divide in our town. I actually did it to draw us together in support of an issue that was going on. My granddaughter is scheduled to be at leadership camp next week. I've called the school several times to ask if this teacher was going to be there. I've been told that they cannot tell me. I cannot tell you, I cannot tell you. She had the opportunity to participate in the CPR parade as a stand-in princess for one of the princesses who were unable to do it, which would have conflicted with the time of ordering with leadership camp. And because of our uneasy feelings and not knowing if he was going to be there or not being transparent and telling us, we made that option for her to do the CPR parade instead, which breaks my heart because this is a child who quit or didn't try out for cheerleading this year because that's how much she loves leadership and what leadership means to her. And she's not going to be able to be at camp with her friends. Anyway, I just don't think it's fair that I wasn't told when my daughter sent an email stating that she would not be there. Mr. Miller was responded to in that email. It didn't just go to my daughter. It went to Mr. Miller. That is completely inappropriate, completely uncalled for. They're also telling us that we have to pay a fee for not letting her go to leadership camp. That's when I had those feelings, what was happening to her or may have been happening to her, the way that he was using the words that he was stating, that he's grooming her. He used that exact those words. And I am not comfortable with her going to leadership camp. That's not fair that we were not told he was going to be there. And it's not fair that he was responded to in a email, sorry.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry that you weren't given the information you needed, and it sounds like it's too late. I can confirm it's not going to be at that camp. And then the other thing I hear you saying is the email issue, and that you're not able to recover the fees for not going to camp. So we'll follow up on those pieces too.
I'm not worried about that.
Right, I understand. Yeah, it's
I'm worried
the
about
spirit of that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay. I have no other speakers.
Marcy, I'm sorry, did you receive any questions that you need to respond to related to the finance report?
I didn't know that.
Okay.
I have to make sure.
I was trying to make sure I had all my things in the right order and not
Yeah.
had that one.
So really late.
It was,
It
I'm
was
just trying to
one
remember
of
where
those.
I put the print out. Do you have it? I don't know. Yes, that was that one. Thank you. See, now that I see it, I remember. Okay, so, the question was in the financials, on one of the pages where it talks about how much each department has spent as a total for the year. Both technology and maintenance and operation look to be in the 50%. And that's an artificially low number. And the reason it's an artificially low number is because during the budget process, we had some expenditures that we included in budget for the purpose of if we had availability of dollars. The dollars we had available for revenue went to other sources so that these dollars did not get spent. So it's not like their budgets got cut. It's that the dollars, extra dollars we put in there didn't get spent. The actuality, if I take those dollars out of those budgets, is that they're more in the 70% range. But it does, because it's budget to actual, it does make it look like it's really low percentage, but it's really not. They're right about where they should be through May 31st.
I appreciate that. That was my original question, and I'll probably always zero in on those numbers, wondering if, expenses have been delayed, or if we've decided not to move forward with certain projects, so that explanation is perfect, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Get back and forth between minutes and my questions.
Yeah, I think that was all.
Any other questions, comments on the budget? Thank you, Marcy.
Sure.
Thank you, Marcy. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to the budget report. Don't go far.
I'm close tonight. Yeah.
Transfers and over. Good evening.
I don't know.
It should be on.
Is it on? Okay, I will just speak then. So I'm Debbie Christensen, Chief Officer for Human Resources and Business Services, and I'm partnering with Marcy Bannon, our Business Services Administrator this evening, to talk about the draft 1920 school budget. So I want to talk about, just kind of cue this up a little bit, why do we do this? And what we do is we try to align with our mission, which is getting all kids ready for college careers in life. And so we keep that at the forefront as we are gathering information to build a draft budget. How we do this is we check in with our stakeholders, with all of the people that are involved in that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, what that process actually looked like, to include principals, administrators, the community. I'll speak more on that. And then what we do is we focus on our goals. So specific to, on the back wall there, and it's also in one of our budget documents, we have the student ends and strategic goals. In there, we have goal 2, which talks about managing and improving effective operations in the district. And a subcategory of that is objective 2.2, which talks about having a sustainable budget. And that's really what we focused on in order to remain aligned with not only our priorities, but also the strategic plan. So what does our process look like? Just want to give a little bit of context for that, because it's, although I know you have received this information, just wanting to make sure that we're walking in step moving forward. So a recap, by December of each year, we are already beginning the process. When I actually wrote some notes today, and I was like, whoa, it's July already, and in December we'll be picking it up again. But we start in December, and as you're aware, we create a budget timeline. And then it's required for a district of our size, and it's dependent upon district size, that we have to have an approved budget by no later than August 31st. So that's a law. As part of the process, we meet with the board in January, and we do a mid-year update on our strategic plan just to give context for kind of where we're at that point as we begin to head further into the budget process, so that everybody is hearing what's happened at present. Next, we meet with leadership team, and leadership team consists of our superintendent's aligned leadership team, which is, we call SALT, and also our principal group, which is 8 principals and assistant principals. We then meet in a group to launch the process with them and give them information, but then we meet as a leadership team, as a SALT group, we meet with every school building, and then our department heads also provide information, so that when we go and talk to our principal teams, that we are listening to what their needs and wants are, what their asks are for the upcoming year. We then have about a half day, we call it a budget summit, and we go into that meeting and we prioritize the asks, if you will, that have come in for that upcoming school year. And we look at, of course, student safety, items that are closest to the students and what will help them be successful in school. So we prioritize so that we know, depending on what the budget overall looks like, where we can, in the future, approve those recommendations, or those asks. We then meet with the board in February to present the strategic and budget timeline. That's kind of the more finalized, although it's always a plan in motion. And from there, we use data to take everything that we've heard so far, along with all of the information that our business services administrator has gathered for what the revenue forecast looks like, what our known expenditures will be. And she works hard to prepare the draft budget with all of those pieces compiled. And then our budget is due to the ESD by law on July 10th, and we've met that obligation, that responsibility. And that's a draft, because of course you haven't had a chance to fully review and to provide feedback, nor has the community had additional time yet. Once a draft budget is developed, we present it in an open meeting, and that's what we're doing tonight. So Marcy will be going through the elements of the draft summary budget so that we can get your feedback. We also, from this point, we already have activated, but we will promote an email address and also make available to the community, we'll have the email address so the community can provide information to us and feedback, because as one of our stakeholders, we want to make sure we have that piece. And then we also will have a public hearing August 15th. And then at present, short of a change to what the anticipated schedule is, the budget would be presented to you on August 15th for final consideration. Again, knowing that we have to approve by, to be lawful, we have to approve by August 31st. So that's how we put together the budget, and Marcy's going to go ahead and tell you at a detailed level with regard to the summary, what it looks like for this upcoming year.
Before I start, everything makes sense to me that I'm saying, but it doesn't always make sense to anyone else the way that my brain processes things. So please stop me and ask questions for anything that doesn't make as much sense to you as it does coming out of your mouth. So no problem with questions. I feel like a teacher. Make sure you ask questions. No question's a bad question. So the draft this is the draft presentation. I'm going to go over the different parts of it. I think you all have it in front of you, so I'll kind of scroll through so people can see. The presentation starts off with a description of what our different funds are in the school district. We have 5 main funds in the school district. The biggest one that we talk about the most is general fund. That's where we get the money from the state. That's where all of our the majority of the expenditures of the district, I would say about 95% of our expenditures district-wide are out of the general fund. So it's where teachers are paid out of, classified, it's where the majority of the revenue comes in. So general fund is the most of it. The next one is ASB. ASB stands for Associated Student Body. It is all student-run, student-driven. So at the high school and the middle school, they both have ASBs. The ASB clubs each year are supposed to vote in their leadership. Each club is then supposed to prepare a budget that they present to the ASB leadership of the school, which then prepare a school-wide budget that's given to me to give to you. So ASB is all supposed to be student-driven. It's student needs. ASB funds cannot be used We can't transfer them in and out. We in general fund can transfer money to ASB to support it, but ASB doesn't support general fund. So it's a one-way move, or it just stays in ASB. The next fund that we have is our capital projects fund. Capital projects is, if you are aware of the Target Portable that we're going to be talking about later, that's what we're using to pay for it. Capital projects has just a couple financing sources. One of them is impact fees, which I forgot to put on this list. I don't know why, that's like the major for us. Other places we can get money from for impact fees is, there is capital improvement levies that some district runs, and that's where the money would go. Should we run a bond and the bond is approved, the money goes into capital projects to fund whatever the bond was approved for. So that capital projects is for large projects in the district, mostly things that are fixing buildings, building buildings. The impact fee portion of it is very limited to only build things or buy things for a building that is new. So we can use it for the Ptarmigan Ridge Portable, but we couldn't just use it for more kids in a class to buy more desks. We would have to buy desks for the portable. So the impact fees are kind of limited subsection of capital projects. The next fund is transportation vehicle fund, and that's all about our buses. So there's a couple different sources of funds that can go in there. The biggest one that we get is from depreciation. We get depreciation for 156 months, and it works out to be 13 years for every bus we buy. So as soon as we buy a bus, it goes on the depreciation schedule, and each year we receive revenue from the state in August to potentially, pay for a new bus once it's all paid off. So they think that they're giving us enough money to buy a bus every 13 years when it's paid off. However, that's not quite the case, because the amount they give us is based on the bus we bought 13 years ago. It's also based on a bus that may not be the appropriate bus for our district. Our buses need to have, such as a stronger engine to make it up our hills. Not every district needs a bus like that. We do need a bus like that. So it's an amount the state chooses to give us, and it's great that they do, but it doesn't cover the cost of a new bus once it's paid off.
And can I add a piece to that transportation vehicle fund? Once buses are too old, then we stop collecting depreciation. So the older they are, it doesn't mean we collect more of it. They actually fall off the depreciation list, because the idea is that they would like our fleet to be more current. And our board has been purchasing at least two buses a year, which has really helped, because we had so many buses that were not, that we weren't receiving depreciation for. And so now we're at a point where we are maximizing that.
We were, when I first got here, there was we had, for the couple buses we had bought before, we had done something called non-voted debt. So it wasn't debt that went out to like a bond, it was that we needed money to buy buses. Our buses were so old, we weren't getting depreciation because they weren't rotating cleanly through the depreciation schedule. So we started, with the board's guidance, to start transferring money each year to get that depreciation dollars more accurate and more going. So now we're.
I just had a quick question. I recall, and I'm not sure if the number is still accurate, but we have about as many alternative transportation vehicles, like vans or cars or transporting students, as we do buses. Are they also included in this fund, or is that?
They're not allowed to be.
Okay.
The only thing that's allowed to be in here is just buses, the yellow fleet. That's it. Yeah, we're not allowed to fix or buy anything besides buses out of this fund.
Okay.
And depreciation only comes in for the buses and can only be used for the buses. The other item that is allowed to be paid out of transportation vehicle fund is major bus purchases. And I was having a discussion earlier about what major bus purchases meant. And it actually there's actually a WAC that goes over, and it means, the WAC means that the school bus repairs have to be approved by the superintendent of public instruction, Washington State, before we can actually use transportation vehicle funds to repair a bus. So it's very rare that it will ever happen that we will have a bus repair that will go to OSPI to ask for their permission to fix our bus. So I don't know that that will happen. I don't know what, we need our money, and we've been using our money to buy buses. And so at this point, I think that's what we will continue to do, rather than fix. Thank goodness we haven't had a big major fix, but. Our last major fund, our last of our 5 funds, is debt service fund. Debt service fund is used to pay for voted and non-voted debt. So our voted debt would be bonds that get approved by the voters. Our last bond was approved by the voters in 2006, is currently set to pay off in December of 2022. So every year, we calculate the amount of revenue we need to receive to pay the bond payment and interest for the year, and that's what we collect during the collection times when people pay their property taxes. The other item that's paid out of there is any non-voted debt that the board has approved the district to go through. And the only non-voted debt we currently have in there is the energy grant that the district did probably in 2012.
12.
I'd say probably 2012, and so we have some debt from that because there was money from, there's a grant that the state did for energy improvements throughout the district, but there was a district match that was required, and so we're paying off the required district match amount of that work. So that's what's in debt service fund. Do you have any questions about the 5 funds? There actually is a 6th fund, but it doesn't come for budget. It is only used for scholarships. So if you hear about our seniors who get scholarships during the senior night, not all of them, some of them go through our PPT, is what's called Private Purpose Trust Fund. Our budget, general fund, is what I'm going to be talking about. If you guys have questions on any of the other budgets, I'm happy to talk to you about them. I'm happy to discuss them, but general fund is our biggest one. The biggest part of the revenue for general fund comes from our enrollment. So part of our budget process is, in this district, we consistently use January of each year's enrollment, and we use that to project out for the next school year. We do this process called roll-up, where we we take our 1st graders, make them 2nd graders, and that's what we budget for the next year. We take our 2nd graders, make them 3rd graders. Our kindergarten numbers, we just leave alone at whatever our current kindergarten numbers are, because we don't ever have an exact idea of who's coming into the district for kindergarten. When we're looking at our 10th to 11th grade numbers, we do not do a straight rollover, because some of those 10th graders are going to go to Running Start, and so we don't want to plan for them to be in the high school. So we plan for a certain number of the 10th graders to go to Running Start and take them out of our roll-up number for 10th grade. 11th grade kids going to 12th grade are already involved in the Running Start program normally, so we don't usually have to adjust that number down. So what you see
And
is,
do you want to address the large senior class
oh yes,
and the impact of that?
yeah, when we get to the graph, the trend, and you see that it looks like we're trending down, the reason for that is because we just had this gigantic senior class that graduated. It was our biggest ever, and our incoming kindergartners aren't as big. So when you look at our average FTE, which is the number for this year, our average FTE for the year, it's higher than our projected enrollment for next year, but that's because of the roll-up that we do, and the senior class was quite large. It's our biggest, as I've heard say, graduation a few times, it was the biggest graduating class in Oregon history. So.
And the reason we use January numbers, Marcy, you don't mind if we
Oh, go
just
right
join
ahead.
you
Yeah,
in
please
the
do.
conversation?
As I said, I forget to say things. So.
You just know it so well. So we use those January numbers to roll up, and we know that Orting's growing every year, but we also want to budget conservatively. So we don't want to project extra kids and take funds for extra kids. We would rather budget a conservative revenue, and our expenditures, we like to budget less conservatively, right? We want to assume we're going to spend and not assume we're going to get a lot of money, just to make sure that we're being really fiscally conservative and responsible.
That's my first bullet in my graph. So this is our enrollment from January for this year. The top 3 numbers are our total number that we consider for enrollment, and the top 3 numbers are 2,682. So that is the number that I used for the apportionment dollars that we're going to talk about next. The next couple sections. So 2605 is the kids K-12 that I'm projecting. The 8 kids for the ALE, we have an alternative learning environment at our high school because not every student learns the same way. And so we have some kids that are in the ALE program, so that's about our average right now for those students that learn more of an online version of class rather than attending classes in a classroom. In January, we had about 69 Running Start kiddos, and that is our 11th and 12th grade only kids that participate in the Running Start program. So that's that trend when we look at it. It's been going up each year, so it's great because then we have more kids that are graduating high school and getting their AA at the same time. So it's a great advantage, and it's definitely cost saving for families to be able to do that. So it's great that we can offer it. The next number, the 194, is the guesstimate based on January, our roll-up number for our CTE, and that's CTE for 7th through 12th grade. We cannot do CTE classes below 12th grade, that's not state allowed. So we have a 7th, 8th grade program, and we have a 9th through 12th program. So the total of both of those are 194. We get enhanced funding for CTE. So when we get to the next section, there is CTE dollars that are broken out, and CTE, I'm sorry, is career and technical education. I forget about acronyms, I know what they mean, but that doesn't mean everyone else knows.
And in some places in the document, including in our community document where we take this and we try to put it in community-friendly language because we want it to be accessible and we want to be as transparent as we can. But you'll also see it referred to as vocational dollars.
Yes, it also is vocational. Sorry. The next number is our special needs numbers. Now, birth to 3 is our first set of special needs that get they get identified by our. Oh, I just went completely blank. It's in the second portable.
Child line.
Thank you, Child Find. Our Child Find program, and we don't offer the services, but the funding comes through the district, and then we use an outside vendor to give them the services that they qualify through that program. So we have about 17 kiddos in the birth to 3 program. The next one is our preschool kiddos, and we're up to about 42, and that's ages 3 to 5 that are in our preschool program. That's not the ECAP that's in the district, that's not actually part of the district numbers. It's really just our preschool program here. Our next number is about 368 K-12 special needs kids, and our special needs population has been growing on a consistent basis, so we've definitely had more kids be identified and getting services out over the years. So the revenue driven by those numbers is listed below. So general education, less vocational classes, is about $22 million. The special education funding dollars comes in a couple different methods. One of them is through something called special education general apportionment, which is $671,000. And then there's another portion that's, why exactly the state splits it out, I can't explain to you. But the other portion of it is $3.4 million. That comes from another state source, but not considered the same. They calculate them differently. Our age 3 to 5 generates its own dollars. The birth to 3 program is included in the special education $3.4 million. The 3 to 5 program is about $166,000 that it generates. Then we have some special programs that our enrollment generates also, and that's the learning assistant program, the transitional bilingual, highly capable, and then there's the money specific to the vocational classes at 7, 8, and 9, 12.
And the learning assistance program serves elementary students who have several risk factors, so they're struggling academically, and then they also typically qualify through free and reduced lunch.
Mm-hmm. And when we get
Students of poverty and struggling academically.
Yeah, and one of our grants that we'll discuss tonight too is Title I, and that's also the other part of LAP. We have LAP and Title, and they kind of work together, funding sources, and they're funded about the same way through the free reduced.
Marcy, I have a question about the alternative learning environment.
Uh-huh.
I think the average was like 89,000 is what we're projecting for.
That's about the money.
Okay.
The expenditures or the revenue? No, the expenditures are, because we have staff in there, we have a full-time classified staff and a partial certificated staff in that environment. The classified staff is there all day long. The certificated staff is not coded there all the time, but they're available to be in that classroom all the time.
And that falls in the general education.
It falls under, actually, the ALE has a separate account code.
Okay.
So when we get to codes by program, it's included in general ed, but it does have its own, we get an enhanced funding for those 8 students because they require a little bit different education. Does that make sense? Or is that
It does, I just saw that highly capable is not included in the general ed.
No, they're completely different sources. And highly
One
capable,
is state and one's federal. right? Is
well,
it- or actually, highly capable is state.
it's state also, but you have to use, and both of them are required to spend on, you can't spend outside the box, so if I don't spend, ALE is a little bit different. They don't require me to prove, we do, but they don't require me to prove each year that we spend the dollars on ALE. They do require me to prove we spend highly capable activities, lab is learning assistance program. Those ones are required to spend on the specific items. ALE is not quite the same. We do have rules and regulations that we have to fulfill, but they don't require us to prove it the same way the other programs do. And VOC is called out because they do require us to prove that also, that it's spent on CTE things. The next couple pages are all about our enrollment trends. So we kind of talked about basic ed already. It looks like it's trending down. We had a really big increase starting the 15-16 school year, and the 16-17, and the 17-18, and we just keep going up for 18-19. 19-20, we're probably going to increase, but we do budget conservatively, so the chart, and we have a big senior class, so it looks a little funny. The next one is our CTE. CTE, with the 15-16 increase in 16-17, we had some more classes offered in the 16-17 year, and because of the way that we budget roll-up numbers in January, our January FTE was lower than our average year ended up being, because I believe we had more FTE in our CT classes from February to June than we did in September through January. So our FTE over the year is higher than the January number because we roll up based on January. So it looks like it's trending down, but that's just because we use January numbers. If we go across the board with our average, then we're not changing any of our programs. We don't really add. We just had more FTE in the second half of the school year than we did in the first.
That was one of my questions. The CTE is kind of near and dear to me.
Yes.
So I was curious if that was, were we cutting classes, were students less interested, but that explains it.
Yeah.
So
We have a couple.
ignore that question when I said previously. Thank you.
We have a couple classes at the high school where there are CT classes that could be offered just second semester or just first semester, and so they're not offered the whole year, which inflates our CT number second semester. So it's not changing, it's just a matter of when they're offered.
Thank you.
Sure. This is Running Start, which shows what I was talking about, that we've increased our Running Start numbers over the years. And Running Start, we get funding from the state, and it's basically a flow-through amount. What we get, we pretty much give to Pierce College or Clover Park or whichever school the students end up attending.
There's some systems that discourage or put pretty tight parameters around Running Start because then you're not collecting the revenue from those students. But we believe in the program. We believe in these opportunities for kids. So we're really, honestly, I'm happy to pass that money through to colleges because it's such a service to kids and families. My own children participated in it, and of course it saves them time in college, saves money, and yeah, it's just such a great program.
The next couple are about our kindergarten program, which have gone up quite a bit over the years. Since 16, 17, they've been on a pretty consistent increase. Then we can talk about where does the money come from? And so we're looking at a great pie chart. So our biggest source of revenue is state general purpose dollars, and that's basically apportionment. 67% of the revenue we get into our general fund comes from the state form of apportionment. It's driven by the FTE that we talked about on the couple previous slides ago, and it's rates set by the legislature. So they determine how much they're going to give us per FTE for it's called a prototypical funding model. So they take the number of kids we have in specific grades and they divide it out by how many principals that generates, how many secretaries it generates, how many custodial it generates, and that's what generates the dollars. They also tell us how much they're going to give us for each position. So if we have 5 teachers, they're going to give us X amount of dollars for those 5 teachers. They're not going to pay us what we pay the 5 teachers, they're going to give us the prototypical funding model that's determined by the state amount for those 5 teachers. And if we have higher or lower class sizes than they decide, they don't change the number, we still get the same amount. So it's state determined how much we're gonna get in this source. The next largest revenue source is is 9%, and that comes from our supplemental education maintenance and operation levy. That amount is capped for the 2019 collection year at $1.50 per thousand, and then will be capped at another dollar amount for the 2020. So we have 2 different tax collection years that are in the 1920 school year. So we have part from one and part from another that join together to give us our revenue. So that'll be about 9% of our local taxes. Our state special purpose are the programs we were talking about. Special ed is in that, transportation, bilingual, learning assistance program, highly capable, and so those are some of the ones that are for specific purposes and can't be spent outside of their intended use. So they're still from the state, they're just not available for any use at all. They have to be specific for the program that they're received for. Our next funding source is 5%, and that is federal funds. So that would include Title I, it would include Title II, nutrition services. We have a special ed program called IDEA that funds the district out of a grant process for costs associated with special ed needs students that are over and above how much we get from the state. Because as you may or may not have heard from the news, school districts don't get enough money for the special needs programs that we run. We just don't. And so even though they've been making adjustments, we still don't get quite enough money. And so another source of that is trying to help with IDEA dollars. And I would tell you what IDEA means, but I didn't look it up. I just know it is IDEA. So I know it's Individuals with Disability
Education Act.
That's it. That makes sense.
When she says Title I and Title II, so Title I is the program that serves our elementary students who are struggling with academically and students of poverty, and who are struggling academically and are students of poverty. They have to be both, and there's a couple other qualifying aspects to that. And then she also mentioned Title II as part of that, and that's supports adult learning, so that's professional learning money from the federal government.
Yes. And new to our district, we also have Title III funding this year, which is bilingual federal dollars. We don't get very much of it. I think it's $4,000 this year and maybe $7,000 or $8,000 for 1920. So it's not very much, but it is more money to help support our bilingual students that qualify for it. And we do supplement that with general dollars. It's another one of those not quite funded the way it should be sources, but we do get dollars for it, so that's great.
Marcy, I have a question regarding the Title I, and thank you, Marcy, for explaining that. But with the homelessness going on, kids who need assistance, do we find that we have enough funds to support their needs?
We have been. We have some general funds a little bit set aside also, but we have a couple funds at our high school and middle school, and it's called Invest Ed dollars. It used to be called SOLPAS. And they're run through that fund that isn't really talked about, the Private Purpose Trust Fund, but that is also used in our district by our counselors when they see a need for a student. If they need to buy an ASB card, or they need to help pay for a physical, or there's certain things and that also help with the homeless students.
Do you want to talk about McKinney-Vento as well?
And McKinney-Vento is also part of that. So we have a lot of McKinney-Vento students where we provide transportation. Those costs are included in our transportation program.
The McKinney-Vento funding comes from?
We don't actually get any McKinney-Vento funding. We just pay what is needed for it.
So it's out of general fund?
It's out of general ed, yeah. So whatever costs are associated with the McKinney-Vento, because it is a program that you don't we're obviously not gonna say no to it, we're gonna support the kids, but there is no additional funding that school districts get to assist with the McKinney event. Okay, and the very last one I think that we haven't talked about is the lowest, which is 3%, which is local non-tax, which includes things such as fines, fees, money that comes in for lunches, that kind of stuff. So investment earnings, donations, we get a significant amount, which you see hopefully in the report I give you each month. We get good chunks from our PTAs. They donate regularly to our school, so that would be included in the local non-tax amount. So I'm going to skip 2 pages because that was the second page of that one. So the next one is, what does the money buy? So we have all that money, and what does it get us? So teaching activities and teaching support, biggest part of our district. The two together are 69% of our entire budget, and that's classroom teachers, that's the specialists, it's paras, it's stuff to buy, it's our extracurricular activities, it's classroom materials, it just goes on, library, health services, professional development for adults. That's all included in our teaching activities number, which is 56% for just teaching activities and then 13% for teaching support. Other support activities would be our next chunk at 16%, and that is our employees in transportation, maintenance, technology, nutrition. It pays for our district insurance, our utilities that we have to pay for, of course. The next is 9%, and that's our central administration. So that includes the board, business services, HR, superintendent's office, teaching and learning, special ed. It also includes the supervisors for the supervisor positions for transportation, nutrition services, and facilities. So all of the supervisor costs are in central administration, where the employees underneath them are in other support activities. And then the last one is 6%, and that's building administration, which is our principals, assistant principals, and then our secretaries in our buildings. So that's where our money buys. Any questions? This goes through those categories in much more detail. So it is sort of the same way. So the first section is all about teaching, and so that's teachers, the teaching activities, which is teaching, payments to other school districts, which we don't have any of in budget currently, but I believe there could be something going to the board tonight that will change that for next year if you approve it. And that would be if we have services in other school districts. So in special needs, we could not need a full staff member, but another district has a full staff member, and they give us a portion of that staff to help a special needs students. That the payment for that service to the other schools would show up in payment to other schools. So not a lot goes in there, but we do have a couple. Teaching support is our next section, which was library, counseling, safety. It all goes by an activity part of the general account code structure that we have in the district. That's teaching and teaching support, which was the 69% we talked about earlier. Then we have central administration with departments. This budget comparison does 17-18 actual dollars compared to 18-19 budget compared to 19-20 budget. So if you look across, you see the differences between all 3 years. Yes?
Health services, does that include behavioral health services that we support?
It includes nurses and anything coded to Activity 26, which would include psychologists. Okay. It would include SLPs, OTs, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, physical therapists, all those. That would all be included in the Activity 26 number.
We also have behavior technicians and supports, and those are often paid through through student services, student support services, or special education.
Yeah, so all of the programs, no matter which program it's paid out of, is sorted this way by its activity. So these are all the activities, or the activities broken out, all the different programs that are supported.
And I feel like I should also clarify, some of those are also paid through the LAP funding.
Yes. Any questions about the comparison by expenditures? The next one is another way of viewing the same information, and this is how do we spend the money? And this is doing it by a different source. So the last one was based on the activity of the program it was doing. This is based on the object. So certificated salaries are obviously our largest part of our budget. They're at 40%. Classified salaries are at 18%, and then payroll, benefits, and taxes are at 24%. So you put all those together, 82% of our budget is people, is our staff. The next part of our budget, supplies and materials, is about 6%, and that's the stuff for materials for the classrooms, stuff that, just supplies and stuff that we have to buy to fund the school. Purchase services is 12% of our budget, and that can be something like utilities is in a purchase service. If we have to pay an outside source because we need them to do a service for us, say we don't have enough sites in district and we need to pay someone else, an outside vendor to give us a site to use in our district to provide the services we need, that would go under purchase services also. Travel is if we have travel from location to location or going to professional development, that goes under 8. And that would include things such as airplane, taxis, car rentals, hotel costs, and it's less than 1% of our budget. The other one that's less than 1% of our budget is, it's called capital outlay, and what this category is, it's a supply and material, basically a supply that costs an individual item that costs over $5,000. So say we had to buy a new server or a new boiler, that would go into this category. And right now it's about, it's less than 1% of our budget as well. Everything keeps working, we're good. What programs does the money support? So we talked kind of a little bit about what the different programs are. Basic education is our biggest one. It's 53% of our budget. Special education, programs for special education and related services for eligible kids, basically that have an IEP or an individualized education program. That is our next biggest chunk, and that is at not the next biggest, that's the next chunk, and it's about 15% of our budget. CTE is about 4% of our budget, and that's the VOC or the career, the 7th through 8th program that we talked about before. Support services, activities that support the educational programs of the district, so that's the same us, district office staff, utilities, insurance, data processing, food service, all the really exciting stuff. And then the last and support services is about 24% of our budget, and then other services are about 4%, and those are the categorical programs that we talked about before, Title 1, 2, 3, 4, we have a few titles, learning assistance program, bilingual, all of those fall into that category. So the next page is about our 1920 MSOC disclosure requirement. In the 15-16 budget cycle, the state gave us more money for MSOCs. MSOC stands for materials, supplies, and operating costs. The state wanted to ensure that the board was aware we got more money and ensured that the board was aware that we were spending that money on supplies and material and not people. So this is required for me to present to you, showing you that the money that we're getting for MSOCs in these categories is not more than we're spending. So the way this reads, we're spending $1.18 million more on MSOCs than we're getting from the state for the same purpose. The dollars for that comes from levy, LEA, one of those sources. So we do spend more on those than we get. So that's your yearly notice. Sorry, some of these things make me laugh, but they are required, so I will do them. The next page is regarding our 4-year budget. With the last year's budget, the 18-19, or I guess this year's budget, we started, one of the requirements by the state legislature was that we start projecting out 4 years for expenditures, revenues for all 5 funds and enrollment.
I always think that's a bit comical too, since the state has a biennium budget.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we are required to do a 4-year
Yep.
budget based on the only information we have, which is at most 2 years.
Yeah, it's great. So it's my best guess. Our enrollment is based on our numbers, rolling up averages. That is, so I use the same method as I use for yearly enrollment. I just roll it up another couple of years. So that's the enrollment figures you see. The enrollment then generates dollars, just as it did, which you'll see on the next page on the 4-year budget numbers. for all the different funds. That's what I do for general fund. For capital projects, capital projects, I look at how much money we could have coming in through impact fees, and then, of course, spending it within the required timeline. Debt service, I look at how much how much bonds we owe on, and I determine each year, so that's what the debt service fund, 4 years based on the revenue and the expenditures we receive for bonds. ASB, I calculate based on the averages for ASB for the past 4 years, and then I generate it out based on what we have been spending and collecting in ASB. Yeah, that's about what I use methods on average best guess scenario that we can for these programs. And transportation vehicle fund, I use, there is a program that estimates what our depreciation will be getting in each year, and that's what I use for transportation vehicle fund, is best based on the depreciation schedule, how much we'll be receiving for each of those years, and then how much we'll be spending out of those also.
And if I can state the obvious, we're projecting out 4 years, which is helpful, and Marcy and I have worked together to forecast out anyways, but then it's revised every year, so even the 4-year budget next year will look different because we have new data, and then we really hone in on it when we're developing that year's budget, so that's the one we really can count on much more.
Yes. So that is my budget presentation. Do you have any other questions?
I'd like to add one more piece. So you also, board and public, see that there's a draft budget summary.
Oh, absolutely.
So what that does is, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, go ahead. You can explain it and then I can go through it.
Okay, oh, great, okay. One thing that Marcy and I worked on together a few years ago was we wanted to make the budget more community accessible. And then we also wanted to increase the ways the community could give us feedback and input on the budget. So we took a very complex thing and worked to put it in more community-friendly language through this budget summary. Then we could share that publicly and then ask for input from the community. But we're trying to increase access and engagement through this piece of it.
Right. And we've done this for the past couple of years. I can tell you that we have communicated in past years through Facebook, through Twitter. It's been on our district website. We have an email address that I can tell you that we don't get a lot of comments. But you know, one year we could. It'd be great. Through the budget email. So this document, I'm just going to go through it because it's basically the same information we just did. It's formatted a little bit differently to try to be user-friendly as possible. So first page is about the district, telling you what the purpose of a budget is, gives you the table of contents. Then we have, of course, our why, our student learning goals, all about the orange. And then it's our mission, our critical questions, our norms, and our collective commitments that are consistent throughout our district, through every plan, I think, that we have. And then I go in to talk about a budget, why we do a budget, and I talk about the 5 different funds that we just talked about in this. The next page is budget summary for all of our funds, and that is the beginning fund balance, required set-asides, and what I'm projecting our ending fund balance is, along with our revenues and expenditures for the year and any transfers we do. In the transfer section, we kind of touched on this. We transfer in general fund, we transfer dollars to transportation vehicle fund, so that's listed under the middle of the page where you see transfers out in general fund. And you'll see it as transfers in transportation vehicle fund. So that's the money that the general fund spends each year to support the purchase of buses, to keep them all on the depreciation schedule. The other thing in the transferred out amount is $66,750, and that is the money needed to pay for the energy grant payments that we talked about before that come out of debt service fund. So those offset each other, and we did talk about those in the other documents, so I want to make sure that you saw those in these. This talks about all of our funds. And then it puts it in a smaller little thing and compares a couple of years like we were doing before, the actual for 17-18 compared to the budget 18-19 and budget 19-20. the enrollment comparison, and then where the money comes from, where the money goes. Just the same pie charts, just set a little bit differently. And then the revenues with actual budget and budget, so for comparison, and by all the different revenue sources are listed on here. So all the different ways we get money are all listed out, hopefully explanatory to the public of where our money actually comes from for each item. And then what we talked about before, we talked about gathering, but this is the real detail on where the money's coming in from. Do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, Marcy did when I was going through this, and I know it's in, the numbers are in the other document as well, but there's, it's like about $30,000 more for transitional bilingual.
Yes.
And I was just, I'm assuming we have additional state funding coming in for that.
We do have a little bit of state funding coming in. We fund a full-time person in transitional bilingual. We changed the percentage that was coded to that account. It was at 35%, it's going up to 55%. We're not changing the certificated FTE we have there, we just changed the coding of the person. So it did go up, we are receiving more revenue, but we still supplement it with general ed dollars because we don't get it.
And we're serving significantly more students who speak English as a second language.
Correct, we've gone up about 20 in the last couple of years, just of kids they keep going up, and that's just fine. And so we get more dollars, but we still don't get the dollars to support even a full person. And I believe we have like 68 kiddos that are in that program, and one teacher with 68 kiddos is not always a good ratio, but.
Right,
I was very pleased to see that.
yeah, I'm definitely supportive, just that number jumped out to me, and I know we've done so much over the last year or two to support services and community engagement opportunities, so I expected that number to go up.
Yeah, and it's not, and unfortunately, it's not capturing all the expenditures because we still pay part out of general fund, like I said, out of for regular education or basic ed, as you see it on here. It comes out of that account. We still support it. We will continue to support it. We'll increase staffing as we need. It just may not show up under that specific program line unless we change some coding around. And which is what we did this budget, is to try to show some more expenditures in that account, although there is more expenditures, they're just not showing that. It's like our highly capable program. It's the same kind of scenario. We have a lot more highly capable opportunities that show up in this dollar amount. This is just, we basically put in the expenditures for the revenue we receive for highly capable, but we have more highly capable programs that are just paid out of the regular education account.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. This draft looks really good, and I like the transparency of our budget. And how does a community member get a hold? You said it was email. But
So on the very last page, it says different ways to communicate. They can, of course, call the district office. They can, of course, we're going to communicate different ways. And oh, actually, I'm sorry, the email address is on page 1. I was thinking it was on the last page. So that they can email comments and suggestions to budgetinput@ording.webnet.edu, and we'll put that out there a couple different ways in the next couple of days. This draft budget will be on the financial part of my website, of the district's website, and so it'll be out there for anyone to view. And I believe with our communication, we'll be sending the link to this with that, so they'll have it.
Marcy, could I
Yes.
jump in too?
Of course.
I just want to share one item with regard to our English language learners, our ELL program, that because the student numbers are growing rapidly, we also are going to support the district in the budget that Marcy's put together. We have an ELL para that will be coming in to support the ELL teacher. We're going to be posting that position this summer. So I just wanted
I
to
forgot about that.
yeah.
Thank you, Debbie.
And although the expenditures don't show up under the ELL line item, we're still supporting the district.
We've got some added support in staffing.
We do, to help out, because there is such an increase in students that need the support. Any questions?
Or should we send any additional questions that you need to address?
I feel like I might have gotten them all, but if I didn't, please let me know.
I want to thank the board for keeping us incredibly busy this week with lots of facilities and budget questions. And I really do mean that authentically because your questions were so rich. It took, took staff time to gather that information and share it back with you through email and then again publicly. But thank you for your thoughtfulness with asking so many questions.
Thank you. Any questions or? Okay. Then, thank you, Marcy. We'll move on to the grant report.
Well, our chief officer is coming forward. I just want to remind the board that this isn't a report that we've done annually, but our board had some specific questions about what grants we're receiving, where we get them, what grants are competitive, are we applying for, what grants, do we just need to put in the work and accountability in order to get and maintain. So thank you for asking that question and requesting this report. So Debbie's going to share it with us.
Yeah, I would just add, I requested this
Yes, you did.
information, and that was, conversations with community members. There were questions about, well, why don't we try to get a grant? And my response was, we do get a lot of wonderful grants, and so I appreciate pulling together the detail on this. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, it was a team effort, so Team Marcy. So I do want to share with you a little bit about the memo that is part of our board docs. Again, this is an area where when we talk about a sustainable budget, grants are a revenue source for the school district. So of course, that's something that we want to apply for and obtain. You'll see in the memo that we have 13 grants that for the 2018-19 school year, and this report is just specific to that school year because there's some others in the works. But for that school year, we had 13 grants. One of those was competitive, meaning that we had to submit and win that grant, as opposed to the others where it's an application source, but oftentimes, like Steve and I have partnered in obtaining applying, I call him my 98%, 2% partner, because he did all the work on submission, but applying for a grant where as long as they have capacity and funding, they will grant that to you.
And I'd like to add a little credit there to you both as well, as one example of a non-competitive grant, but that we weren't receiving even a few years ago. So even though grants were available and not competitive, our district wasn't going after all these opportunities that we are now. So now we have the teacher mentor grant that we go after, which takes work to write, to maintain, to report, a teacher principal evaluation grant. So these things are available, but we weren't always pursuing them. So thank you for that.
I do that, and thank you to Steve. That was moving forward, even as recent as today, there was a grant that I saw, that Marcy and I saw when we were looking at an email that came out of OSBI, and so that's a conversation that we're going to have for upcoming years. So we don't want to overlook opportunities to not only bring in that revenue, but obviously provide the services that we can for the students. And with regard to the 13 grants that are listed on the memo, 6 of them are federally based, and those are our Title I, II, III, and IV that we've talked about earlier in the budget report and the finance report. 4 of them are from the state, so state of Washington. 2 are local from the Puget Sound DSD, and 1 was private based. And I need to correct an error that we have on here. That errors happen, and I can tell you that a comma should have been a decimal point. So when you look at the memo and you see that Title III is $4 million,
I was really excited.
it's not
about that.
400,000, it's not 40,000, it is 4,000. So sorry about that. I too was excited when I added up all of the column today, and that's how at the same time that Director Thibodeau was asking a question, Marcy Bannon and I we were reviewing this, and I had just taken it upon myself to add up the column. And I'm like, yes, over $4 million. And then she said, what? So the number is approximately $1.1 million for the 13 grants. But that's $1.1 million that is part of the boarding school district. Some of the areas that the grants support, I just want to highlight those with regard to staff, students, and then also transportation. So with regard to staff, these grants are supporting some of our professional development. our mentoring program, and also along the lines of professional development, specifically to our evaluation framework that we use with our certificated staff. So there's some support there so that they can be trained to come in for that PD, and there's some financial resource that assists us in paying for that, as well as some professional development or PD for our nursing staff. With regard to students, these grants provide math support. They provide some staffing for a graduation specialist, support in the district at the high school. We have funds that support those with disabilities, and staff support for intervention. So for those students who we can provide additional supports to help them with their educational learning. Again, bilingual, there's information on here with the grants to support that. Technology, and then also one of the grants is for 18 to 21 work-based learning students who are, of course, in our Oregon School District until they're 21, but it supports them getting jobs in the local community. And lastly, the surplus grant that Marcy had referenced earlier with regard to transportation. So in closing, unless you have questions for me, I'd be happy to answer and/or ask Marcy to come up to the podium as well. But I just want to let you know or reconfirm on behalf of Dr. Shepherd that we will continue to look at all grant opportunities and apply for those that we feel not only fit within the Oregon School District, but allow us to provide additional services for kids.
I would just like to say thank you to you and Marcy and Debbie for pulling the information together, because I do think it represents an impressive amount of support to the students, but also the work to get these grants. And so I appreciate that, and thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm hopeful that kind of the momentum that started over the last few years continues. There's corporate grants and private grants, and I don't know what we could do to seek those out, or just maybe elevate them. Maybe there's teachers or other staff members out there that they might be passionate about the grants and the services they could offer, and we could get that going. It could be a full-time job, I think, seeking out grants, and so I'm not saying tomorrow, but just over time. I'd love to see
It's a good goal.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, the next item on our agenda is the first reading of policy considerations.
Director Thibodeau, actually Vice President Thibodeau now. You submitted a question about Form 5253, and if this is a time where you'd like some more information about that, based on the question that you submitted, Executive Director Rapp would be happy to.
Yes, I do have
To
another
support
question.
that. Okay.
And I first want to apologize because I feel like I keep being a roadblock to this policy, but it's important for me.
We really are grateful for the way that our board is engaged and the questions you're asking. This is the third time we're bringing this policy back for first reading, and it's because you're not ready. You know, you're not settled, you keep pressing on it, and so
And
thank
I'm
you
bored
for.
with myself. I thought maybe it's good for now, we'll work on it next time when it comes up for review, but it's still not sitting right with me. This is specifically about the form maintaining professional staff and student boundaries, and there's two parts of it that are troubling to me. First of all, we're continuing to call out wrestling when I feel like coach-student contact can occur in virtually any sport. It could be helping someone with a golf swing, or, batting positions, or wrestling is a wonderful sport, and I just think that our policy should be suitable for any athletic activity. And then also, in this latest revision, we call out contact with an opposite gender, and I don't think it should matter what gender. It could be, two females or two males. So just the wording doesn't seem quite modern enough for me.
Well, it's probably to your advantage that this came as late as it did today, because I would be much more appropriate to present in my singlet, my wrestling singlet. So I I could have presented tonight my
That's a
singlet.
close one, that
I know,
wasn't it?
yeah, escaped. As I understand, and I looked at the policy and we were talking about that, the reason why wrestling is singled out, and as Debbie and I were kind of talking about, the best way I could describe it is when kids are about this big, we teach them that this is the don't touch me zone. But that's how you coach wrestling. That's the zone with which you coach wrestling. And wrestling holds are demonstrated which actually touch the private parts explicitly, unlike any other sport. And so, because this came from WASDA, and it's risk management, pool driven and whatnot like that, you might have incidental contact in other sports, body contact and so on and so forth like that. The reason why it's leveraged with wrestling is because with girls entering into the sport in a primarily male-coached sport, you actually have males who are touching females in areas that in otherwise could, if they were adults, get them fired. And so that's probably why it's differentiated for wrestling. And why it's not differentiated for male-on-male contact is probably simply because as you learn how to wrestle from when you're a kid, you understand that that's part of the deal. I mean, we get in, well, it's been a few years, but you wear your funny little tights and you grab each other, and we call it grappling. And so that's probably the best clarification I can give you on that, why it's differentiated for wrestling, because it's completely different in the context of the way all other sports, contact sports, are taught. It is about hand-to-body contact, and the body contact are in those zones that would otherwise be pretty detrimental.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand your point. And my sons grew up wrestling. I still think we've had some fabulous female wrestlers who I would love to welcome here as coaches, and I just feel like we're kind of, I think about like defensive basketball, where you've got, butt to groin action, blocking people out. I just think that there's opportunities in other sports where coach-to-student contact is part of the game and part of the coaching, and it just seems like this policy should apply to everything.
Well,
That's where
and we probably need some clarification on that too, because it's a form, not a
Yeah.
policy.
Right,
So
that's true.
that's the other part which
Yes.
we probably,
It's intended
as
to
we were
provide
talking about it,
guidance.
we were trying to distinguish that as well.
Yeah,
Right.
and it doesn't impact the board input that we want and seek. Because what we want to make sure is, as the board sets the what, which is the policy, and we set the how, which is the procedure and forms, we want to make sure there's a vision alignment. So just like I give you recommendations on policy, we need your input on the procedures and the forms to make sure that they really do work together well. But I wonder if we're kind of, if I may say, grappling with this,
Grab a root and
with
grab.
this policy,
That's what
or
my
with
coach
this
would say.
form. Maybe we need to bring it back to a board work session. Because I'm wondering if it needs, because right now it's in a first read, but I wonder if it needs to be moved to a discussion item.
I don't know what everybody else.
I have some questions too. I spoke about educators communicating with kids outside of the school on their cell phones. And I'm a parent who has a child who is the executive president. She also worked with prom committee. And so a lot of those times they're communicating at home or on the weekend on a phone conversation. I think we need to look at this a little bit more. I like the idea of either having parental consent or having the parent on the thread. I think that's important, especially with everything that's going on to protect our children. And it doesn't put the educator in a bad position, whether it's male or female. Their communication is transparent. The parent knows what's going on. I've never had any issues with my child communicating on her cell phone with an educator, but I think that if we're going to have a form like this and we have boundaries, that we need to maybe set some guidelines and maybe take a
also think about if there's anyone else we need to bring to the table to help us in this, and board, if there's anyone else you like do we want the athletic director, can you provide any clarity? And maybe or maybe not, but I'm wondering if there's, because it's our third time bringing this forward, and thank you, right? It just shows that you keep pressing, and when it doesn't feel right to you, you're not just saying, well, okay, it's our third time, we've got to quit bugging the staff. So I thank you for keep pressing, but I'm wondering, maybe who we need to invite to the table to help us think about this. Mr. Coleman, exactly, the wrestling, our wrestling coach, maybe athletic director.
Should be able to bring them
Okay.
to the table to help us and
Yeah. Okay.
clarify so what ideas, so.
And talk about the communication.
Right, and also, as was mentioned, in public comments about educators with children and friendships develop. A great example, I was on the scholarship committee this time around, and one of our great students, he was an Eagle Scout, and he would walk one of our educators' child home from soccer as part of his Eagle Scout training. So in that situation, that there has to be an exception, or for a child who's friends with an educator's child. But I understand the point, the boundary. But I think there needs to be more guidelines regarding that.
So let's move this to a board work session. I'm assuming September, because it's our next board work session that we have. And then we'll also want to make sure our chief officers are already present at the table, but we want to make sure she's at that meeting, because it'll be essential to have our HR leader there as well. So thank you. We'll bring it to a conversation. Maybe fourth time is a charm, and maybe not. We'll see.
Any other comments on the supporting district facilities procedure? Okay. That was our first reading, so we will move on to the second reading. And did anyone have any comments for these? Marcy?
So when we brought the discipline policies to the first reading, you gave us some homework and said, we'd like to know how the district is going to be responding to these really significant changes in the discipline law that's reflected in the policies that the board is putting here on second reading. And so, yes, you requested that we give you a report on how we're addressing the law in response to this policy that's here. So Executive Director Rab is ready to share that with you.
So I'd like to start with kind of a broad overview of what the changes really look like. And so there's really two really big ideas to the discipline policy changes. And one is keep kids in class and in school. And then the second big idea is involve the families to do that. So those are really the big ideas. All the different pieces that fit underneath that can fit pretty comfortably and nicely under those two policies. And under keep kids in class and in school, this idea behind that is that suspensions and expulsions and class exclusions don't just keep kids out of school, but they impact relationship. And what we do when we bring all our new teachers in for our training day in August, we just hammer the idea of classroom management, student learning, all leveraged by student relationships. Kids will bend over backwards for people who they know care about them and see them as individuals and address their, try to address those individual needs. When the idea behind this is the disproportionate discipline that's been meted out to kids in a lot of different systems. I think our system is pretty good, but we're also a part of a larger, state system. is that it's part of the achievement gap and the opportunity gap that happens in Washington State is directly tied to behavior policy and discipline policies in schools. And so that's kind of the background for what they've done here. So one of the first things that they did was keep kids in class. And so the easiest way to understand that is trying to make it a little bit, instead of just kicking a kid out of class because they're annoying or because the teachers had it, there's processes and procedures in place where it has to be progressive, it has to be tried to be restorative, and if a student is removed from class, that is called a discipline event. And if they are not in class as an elementary student, or if they're not allowed to return to their schedule by the end of the day, it converts that to a suspension. So that's very different. The stakes of having a kid out of class is much higher than it used to be. What that includes, precludes for us is that we have to get really clear on what it is that initiates a student being removed from class, what's the progressive process to try to intervene with the student short of that exclusion, and then communicate that effectively and consistently in each of the schools between the administration and the teachers. So that's the work that they're going to be doing. Teachers still have the right to remove students from class for behavioral reasons. They can have the student out of their class for up to 3 days, but that would be converted, that would be considered a suspension. But still, along with that is, and this is kind of a recommended in law, but it's certainly one of our processes, was if a teacher sends a student out of class, what is the process for getting the student back into class that connects that teacher and that student back together, whether it's just a short period of time or whether it's for the rest of the day. And so that's the conversation that I'm having with administrators, still keeping that idea of relationship at the forefront. The idea of reducing the frequency by which kids are kicked out of school, starting this year, every school district is to eliminate a zero tolerance policy. So that means, and as you know, our zero tolerance policies that were put in place, tobacco, alcohol, weapons, some of those kinds of things, there is no such thing as a zero tolerance policy anymore. That doesn't mean that kids get to start smoking and drinking at school, but what it means is that they are not, it's not mandatory that there's a suspension for those violations. In fact, it requires the districts to try to find other avenues of correcting the behavior prior to suspension. Easiest way to think about it is suspension is considered a last resort, not an automatic consequence to things. Now where the exception for that is in weapons. So it's still, and it's not even mandatory that they get suspended or expelled for weapons. That's been written off the books too, but it's appropriate.
We landed with a tentative agreement to present to you this evening that was well within the bargaining parameter. Also fits within the budget that had the draft budget that you saw tonight. It's already in there. Our PSC members, they voted yes to ratify the tentative agreement. And then the next step is to bring it to you for your consideration. This would be a 3-year contract, and over the course of the 3 years, it would allow the employees to be brought closer to average at 16% total. And that includes what's called the implicit price deflator. It's what we used to know as COLA, cost of living adjustment. And that typically is about 2%. It's unknown at this time for each of the 3 years. Staff is pleased with the process. We received some good feedback and collaboration with PSC. It was a very, very good process from our perspective and the feedback that we received. And we'd love to have your consideration of approval for this 3-year tentative agreement.
Wonderful.
I'm really proud of the bargaining sessions that we've conducted and participated in, because we do value our employees. And I think that hearing from you that it
was acceptable. It's great. It's a good start to the school year.
Thank you.
Pretty good job.
Well, it was a collaborative effort. The PSC came to the table ready to collaborate and talk with us, and we felt really good about the bargaining relationship that we had between the two parties.
It's great news, and happy to get off on a good start. That's great. Can I get a motion to approve the agreement?
Make a motion to approve the collective bargaining agreement with the Northern School District and public school employees supporting for a 3-year term spanning 9/1/2019 through 8/31/2022.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. That's
Thank
great
you.
news.
Appreciate it, Board of Directors.
Good job.
PSC will be happy to hear it as well.
Yes.
Good job.
And the next item is administrative contracts.
Yes, so we also have, we have a variety of employee groups in our district, of course. And you may recall that last fall, we did some bargaining with OEA, which is our certificated group. And at that time, we meaning all districts in the state, had just finished receiving information about the impacts of McCleary and what that would do to the legislation, what that would do to our salary opportunities for employees. And so in increasing the educators, the certificated staff members' salaries, you can imagine that across the board, when you try to work on calibrating everything so that you have a system that works in your organization, that if you don't make additional movement, that you create compression. So this year, we have a principals bargaining agreement, and the 8 members that are part of that.
Can I stop?
You bet.
Explain compression.
Sure. If I make $10 and you make $11 and I get a raise and I make $10.75 and you're my boss, it's compressing because I now make almost as much as you. So that is what I mean by compression.
Thank you.
You bet.
I understand what you mean, but I want everybody to understand what you mean.
Thank you. So we have not only the principals group, and they are an association. They actually are a bargaining unit, just like they're an administrator bargaining unit, just like OEA and PSC. And within their association, their contract was did expire June 30th, 2019. Now, we bargained ahead of that, and I observed, but was not the bargainer for that because my salary, mine being part of SALT, was attached to a cell on that salary schedule, so I recused myself from that. But I was present because we're going to live the contract and apply the contract, and it was important to understand the language that went into developing that. But our consultant did work with that group, and very collaborative, it was a wonderful process. It didn't take many meetings, but speaking of compression, one of the primary issue that the principals raised is that we had a cell on that principal's salary schedule that because of what had happened with our other bargaining units, the elementary assistant principal cell could actually could work full year as opposed to a school year portion and not be paid more than a certificated staff member. So we had compression, we had a problem. And so what we did with that salary schedule is, or what the consultant did, is they went through and they tried to make it so that each of the steps across the salary schedule had even increments of movement. So it wouldn't be, you would go from step 1 to step 2 and get 1%, and you would go to step 2 to 3 and get 1.5%. We made it even across, so we now have that equalized. We also looked at what it would look like if you were at a level of assistant principal elementary to assistant principal of middle school, We also looked at what it would look like if you were an assistant principal and became a principal, and all of those were equalized across the schedule. So what we're asking for you tonight is that you will consider the 3-year tentative agreement that was reached with the principals. They too have ratified the agreement, and the agreement, should you approve it, would be retro effective July 1, 2019. We've issued contracts but under the old rate because we wanted to ensure that we were retaining staff, but we would reissue contracts with the new rate. Attached to that, of course, we needed to look at, I already defined SALT earlier as our superintendent's aligned leadership team. Should we not do anything with SALT, we would have a greater issue of compression because one area attaches to another, and as I said, to have salary schedules that work across the school district, it would be important to look at that group as well. So there are contracts for your consideration tonight that would be a 1-year contract for SALT, and within those contracts, because in the past, I mentioned that for example, my salary as one of the SALT members was attached to a cell, so my salary would be the same as a high school principal, for example. That isn't typical. Typically, you look at a succession plan, and you look at what it would look like if, for example, a high school principal wanted to move into an executive director role, and that normally is a bit of an increase for salary. And so you'll see in the proposal to you tonight that the salaries would have a 2% increase for the purpose of having a separate step for our executive director and chief officer team. In addition, the superintendent we have a contract for you to consider there. That is a 3-year contract, which is typical by RCW. And in that 3-year contract, like the other SALT members, it is a similar amount. It's actually a little bit less as far as the increase that would be reflected in that contract, but it is similar, and we would ask that you would consider all 3 to allow us to continue to have or to create alignment across the district that is sensible from the staff's point of view in how you create a salary matrix across the district.
Great, thank you, Debbie.
So we need to make a motion for one of each one, huh?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna do the first one. Make a motion to approve the agreement within the ordinance school district number 344 and the ordinance principles for the 3 years term commencing July 1st, 2019 and ending on June 30th, 2022.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Happy to continue with you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Then we have the next motion.
I'll motion to approve the contract between the Orange School District number 344 and the district's executive directors and chief officer for 1-year term beginning July 1st, 2019 and ending on June 30th, 2020.
I second.
Any discussion? Other than really happy with all the work to align all of these contracts. I appreciate it. I know a lot went into it.
Not that I plan on going anywhere, but it does, I can speak for HR that it really helps with recruitment and retention to have a sensible and logical salary schedule
Yes.
and something that makes sense when you're looking at.
And Steve talked about the relationship with the students, but the relationship with our employees is paramount in these, and I just appreciate the work that's gone into it and the partnership in developing changes. It's been wonderful.
Just don't leave, stay.
I'm planning to, right?
None of you did a good job.
You're stuck with me.
Even though you're going to show.
So, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then the next motion?
Make a motion to approve the contract between the ordinance school district number 344 and Superintendent Dr. Marcy Shepherd for a 3-year term commencing July 1st, 2019 and ending June 30, 2022.
I'll go ahead and second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. That motion passes as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't move anyone.
Everyone's
Okay,
getting
Marcy?
paid.
Everyone's getting paid.
Everyone's getting their paychecks.
Stay with us. The 22, 23, 24. 1 new year.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is the novel appeal process. And the board held quite a bit of discussion about the Eleanor Park novel. There was appeal to us to review the book and determine whether or not it should stay in the Ording Middle School library, and what happens next with the appeal. We had good discussion, and I feel that it was pretty unanimous. I think we all agreed that the policies that we have in place currently, that we didn't follow them as well as we could have. And because of that, we really want to, we need to make, as a board, we're required to make a decision on what happens with the book. And so we have a motion that I would like to make. And we took quite a lot of feedback, and it's just kind of backing up a little bit more. There's a lot of feedback, a lot of information provided to us from both parents' perspective, policy information, the appeal process, the timeline of the conversations that have gone on. And anyway, through all of that work and all that conversation, I feel comfortable making a motion that the novel Eleanor and Park be removed from the middle school. And if at any point in time it wants to be, or someone wants it to be reconsidered, that it go through the filters and conditions, and that we, I'm going to change a little bit from what I said at our last meeting. The conditions or filters that we already have in place, or if new conditions or filters are developed, that the book goes through that process. So currently we have policies and guidelines in place to select books for our middle school. If we go forward in developing new conditions, it would go through that new set of filters. But for right now, move. This was a really messy motion, but I'll move.
We have audio recording, so we can put up the transcript.
So that's my motion.
I'll go ahead and second that motion.
The big motion, I second it.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I just wanted to add on what you were saying, Carrie. There was just a lot of discussion in the boardroom, and you know, it is important for us to come up with more procedures and filters and guidelines. So I just want the public to know that that is something that's very important to us, and we'll be in communication with the librarians from every school just to make sure that we're all cohesive in the procedures and policies.
Yes, and as an outcome of this, when these policies do come up for review, we've got some ideas, and kind of using this situation, looking through that lens of the policies to make sure that they're doing what we intend them to do, and that they're written clearly enough so that we can follow them cleanly next time. So with that, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion passes. And see how it works. Stanley didn't come on the longest meeting.
He's experienced.
Called it. The next item we have is board comments. Are there any additional comments from the board? Marcy.
I do have one comment. We, as a district leadership team, I've given each member, each principal and SALT member a copy of this book, 4 Disciplines of Execution, and they're also gonna get another book, but it's kind of a surprise, so I can't say it right now. At our leadership, our admin advance, that's what a lot of people would call an admin retreat. We don't say retreat because we're not kicking back, and we're definitely not falling back. We are charging and moving forward. So at that admin advance, I will get another one. But I brought a copy for each board member, as we know that our strategic plan ends in 2020, and so a big work as we move through the 1920 school year is strategic planning and how we're involving, how the board is setting direction, and we're involving staff, student, community voice as we build through that next strategic plan. And this book is a great resource as we look at how to really effectively execute a plan. So I brought one for each of you. Our leadership team is going to be using this throughout the year, and I'm going to use it as I facilitate the strategic planning process that supports the board's vision. But I wanted to share that.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is our roadmap to holding the team accountable.
Yes.
It's like Oprah's book club.
Right, Oprah's book club. I'm a business book junkie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marcy.
Yes.
All right. The last item. I will move to adjourn the meeting. Can't even see the clock this late at 8:31 p.m.
Thank you.